Hey, welcome to the Master Your Mix podcast. My name is Mike Indovina, and thanks for hanging out with me today. Today, my guest is Mark Lewis, and if you're not familiar with Mark, Mark is probably best known for working in the modern heavy metal hard rock scene. He's worked with artists like Cannibal Corpse, Whitechapel, Black Dahlia Murder, DevilDriver, and Trivium, and a whole bunch more. But he is definitely someone who is really well known for getting great guitar tones. And so in this episode, we definitely dive really deep into his understanding of where great guitar tone comes from. And in it, he breaks down a lot of the little tiny elements that a lot of people often forget about and how everything really does come together. And this is important to talk about because, you know, there's a lot of videos. We talk about one in this episode where there's videos on the internet that talk about where does tone come from? And they're often these kind of like quote unquote scientific experiments that seem to say that tone really doesn't come from anything other than, let's say, a guitar pickup or something like that. You know, it really dismisses all of these extra parts of the equation, from the player to the amp to the speaker to the cables to all these things. And, you know, Mark is someone who has really made a career based on getting great guitar tones, but great guitar tones that sound different. If you listen to his records, they do sound different from album to album. And it's really about him leaning into the sound and the uniqueness of the artists that he works with. And so if great guitar tone just came from one thing, most of us would have the same sound, right? So it really does come down to all of these other little ingredients that he talks about here that ultimately will make your sounds sound great, but also unique, and really highlight the individuality of the musicians you're working with. And one of the themes that keeps coming up a lot in this episode is the idea of putting in the work. You know, whether it's putting in the work to get a great sound or putting in the work to build your career, there's a lot of times in this conversation where Mark brings up this idea, and it really is the thing that helps to separate one engineer from another and what makes somebody successful and another person not, and what makes one person have great tones whereas another one doesn't. You know, so this theme of putting in the work comes up quite often, and I do think that it is something that is a really important thing to hear. And if you're someone who is struggling to make your career get off the ground and to attract the right people for your studio and get high-paying gigs, it's going to come down to a lot of the things that Mark talks about in this interview. So with that said, let's just jump right into it. Mark Lewis, thank you so much for being on the Master Your Mix podcast. How's it going today, man?
I'm good, man. Just taking a break from doing a little mixing, and be nice to have a chat and actually have some human contact.
Of course. For people who might not be familiar with you and who you are, what you do, and all the cool stuff you've been up to these days, can you give us that story?
Yeah, I'm a producer, mixer, engineer, writer. I'm based in Nashville now, but I grew up in Southern Maryland area. I moved to Florida in 2003, met Jason Suecof, and, you know, started working with him for a long time, and, well, worked with him for a couple of years, and we ran a studio together for quite a while, and then ended up in Nashville about eight or 9 years ago. And I just worked mostly with heavy metal bands, heavy metal hard rock stuff. I mean, I would do anything that's thrown my way, but the heavy metal stuff and the hard rock stuff seems to pay the bills, and, you know, I don't have any shortage of bookings, so I'm lucky there. And that's really it. I mean, I'm just kind of a metal guy, and very. Yeah, I don't know. I could go as deep down this rabbit hole as you want. Very engineer and producer focused, very, I guess, kind of old school. Yeah.
Well, how did you get into all this stuff to begin with?
I'm a guitar player. I was a guitar player. Now I don't get to do that much these days. I started playing guitar when I was like 11 or 12. It was my entire life until I was in my 20s. I mean, I spent all of middle and high school playing guitar as much as I could. Gave up sports and skateboarding and all the shit that kids do, and just focused on playing guitar, and was taking lessons from some really great teachers in Maryland where I grew up, and started doing pretty heavy into theory class and like choral analyzation nerd stuff, and did that, went to college for performance for a couple semesters. Did some summer performance stuff at Berkeley. Just really like very, very performance focused stuff. And I got to be a pretty decent player, I guess. I mean, I mean, shit, it's hard to consider myself anything spectacular considering the guys I've worked with now. And that was really what led to it. I just started playing guitar. I had a dad that was he was into music, but he was a bit of an audiophile too, had really good stereo setup when I was a kid. Had some JBL 4311s that were like the classic studio monitor. That was our home stereo when I was a kid. And I grew up listening to music on those, and he had all sorts of good stereo equipment and tape decks and stuff, and I used to fuck with it, and he would get pissed off at me, and then finally started kind of showing me how it worked. And so it went from, playing guitar and like, why do I not sound like James Hetfield to, how do I make this work? And yeah, that was it, man. Just being a musician, like being fascinated why I couldn't make myself sound as good as the guys that I loved. And I think a lot of people have similar stories, and that's really, really it. That's what led to it. And I had some really good guitar teachers. One in particular who really opened my eyes to production, because I would bring in Metallica stuff and Megadeth stuff, and they always, both those bands and Slayer as well, always had controversial, if not great, production. I remember him explaining to me things about why Injustice for All sounded the way it did, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should listen to the level of the bass or listen to the way the guitar sounds or whatever. And it just became an obsession. And when I started playing in bands, this was late 90s. I mean, we were paying studios $60 an hour, for a local studio at the time. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. How much are we paying these fucking people? Like, maybe I should do this, because I was already fascinated. And then I had engineers when I was making demos. They're like, you have a really good guitar sound, man. You should think about working here, doing studio stuff. I'm like, really? All right. Cause it was, it all, there was a lot of things that pointed at me doing that. It's also just the way my mind worked. Severely ADD, spent my childhood with probes hooked up to my brain, on Ritalin in the 80s and like shit like that, like going to neurologists and like, why am I an articulate kid but can't pay attention? I can't take tests on time. I can't do this and I can't do that. And it just kind of like, I think a lot of us end up in fields like this where you can hyper focus and, just all these things pointed to me coming to this as a profession. It was just kind of like, all right, this makes sense for who I am and what I'm interested in.
Is that how you got into the production side? Like, obviously you said you had a guitar teacher who was kind of getting you into that side of things, and then you had studio guys telling you, hey, you're really good at this. Was that the gateway in? Was that like kind of how you got your foot in the door in a studio and started learning the process?
Yeah. I mean, the first stuff that I did was on ADATs with a studio in Maryland. A guy named Ron Vento. He still owns a studio in Waldorf, Maryland. Yeah, he was just like, hey man, like you really like seem to spend a lot of time on your guitar sound. Like you seem to like understand this. And I was like 16 at this point. He was like, you should like, you should look into this. And I was already like so deep into equalization and things like that. I had one of those Johnson Millennium amps, which is basically like a Digitech 2112 in an amp form. And it had parametric EQs built in and all sorts of different EQs. And I was really obsessed with Metallica and Megadeth and Slayer, and like just was like, why does my guitar sound not sound like that? And I was I got very into honing in on those frequencies and trying to figure it out. I mean, I had no idea about microphones and things like that at that point, but it was just like, oh, can I make my guitar in the room sound, like I wanted it to? That was it. I ended up going to Berkeley for 2 summers between my junior and senior year summers. And so this is 25 years ago. Took some recording classes. I think I got like a D in one of them because I forgot I even signed up for it on one of them, which was funny. Learned a little bit there. It was the first time I got in front of an SSL. it all just made sense. I don't know, man. I wouldn't say it came easy to me. I don't think anything came easy to me musically. It was just like, it made sense. Signal flow made sense. Studios made sense. It was just like, oh, I can put this into this and this into this, and that type of stuff. It just, I think a lot of people gravitate towards studios like that, and if your mind works in that way, you're comfortable there,
For sure. Yeah, I mean, if you're super hyper focused, then you're gonna be concentrating on the tones and the sounds, and I mean that's a necessity in this field, right?
Yeah.
And so I could see how getting into it could be an obsessive field to get into. But I can relate to that too. Like, I remember being in one of my first studio experiences, and the guitar, like the engineer tracked this, and I remember feeling like, oh man, like these guitars sound so weak. Like, what's up with them? And then, I'd listen back to my favorite records, and I'd be like, I think I hear two guitars, like I hear doubling or something like that. And the engineer's like, well, I guess we could do that. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And then it sounded awesome. And then, then I was like, fuck, well, I get this now, like I should do more of this, So I kind of relate to it in that sense of just like when you know what you want and you just start like obsessing over it, you're going to get there and get good results. So yeah, this is a good field for that, for sure. So you talked earlier about like getting to work with Jason Suecof, and you said you started a studio with him too. And I was curious to dig into that relationship a little bit too, and just learn more about like, how that all came to be, and maybe what were some of the big lessons that you learned in your time working with him that still carry on to the work you do today?
Yeah, I mean, he had Audiohammer. I mean, he moved to Florida in 98 or 99, and he's owned the same property there since then. So I mean, what I stepped into a situation that he essentially built. I mean, there's no mistaking that. I mean, we met right when he had done that first Trivium record, the blue covered one. I forget the name of their album, and it was right about when he was starting to do Ascendancy. And like I remember, hanging out, and we watched Trivium's first video on MTV together, like in his living room, and it was a big deal. It's like, it was his mix, and I think maybe Jim Morris mastered it or something, or Tom Morris or somebody. Like it was like it was a Florida thing, and it was cool. It was crazy. It was not like Trivium was something that we really aspired to, because they were our peers, but it was like the fact that he was a part of it and it was on MTV, it was like, holy shit, like this is awesome. And then he made Ascendancy, and I was finishing up school. I went down there to go to Full Sail and hated it. Not to talk shit on Full Sail. There's a lot of people that rely on, make a living and all that stuff from that company, but it was a wash for me. I felt very ridiculous being there. But luckily met Suecof, and he was doing Ascendancy right at that time when I was finishing school. And he wasn't super busy. He was pretty busy, and I was down there helping him a little bit. He had another guy that was interning with him while he made Ascendancy. He basically was like, yeah, man, I'd love for you to work here more often, because this other guy kind of annoys me a little bit, and I just don't have a ton of work. And I'm like, all right, man, well, I guess I'm going to take back off to Maryland. And I moved back for about 3 or 4 months. In 2004 or 5, maybe late 04, early 05, I don't remember, because I'd already lived in Florida for over a year at that point. I was teaching guitar again, and then literally within a couple months, I mean, it was less than 6 months, I was home. And he called me up and was like, hey dude, I'm getting real busy because of Ascendancy and getting these Roadrunner projects, and Roadrunner has this Roadrunner United thing going on, and I need a good assistant. Like, can you come down, and if it goes really well, why don't you just live here, and I'll pay you what I can. It wasn't like, hey, I'm going to pay you $15 an hour. I'm going to pay you $8 an hour. It's like, come live here, sleep on the floor. You can have this bedroom, and I'll pay you what I can. And I came down and did the Roadrunner United thing. Was my first paying gig with Suecof. Roadrunner paid me on that, and then he's like, hey man, just stick around. And I think eventually within like a couple months he was paying me $800 a month or something, like, and we were working around the clock, and we were inseparable in terms of the studio for the better part of 18 months. I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, I think he'd probably say it too, like there was a bit of a we would clash a little bit, like it was funny. We worked great together, but we would clash a little bit because he really trusted me to do guitar stuff. And then I can't remember the things we would clash on, but we would argue. And I mean, we're still the best of friends to this day. Like, I love him to death. We're like brothers. But there was like enough tension that like he's like, dude, I don't think he was ever like, fuck, you got to go. It was like, dude, you need to be doing this. And I remember one day, I think I'd come back from Christmas vacation seeing my parents. This was like 2006 or something. Maybe it couldn't have been 07. I don't even think it was that late. Because I mean, it was like a year. And I came back and I came to the studio, and he's so amped up and always so kind of anxious. And he was like rolling around in his wheelchair out in the driveway when I rolled up, and I'm like, oh, he must really want to talk to me about something. Like, he seemed excited. And as soon as I got out of the car, he's like, hey man, you're fired. And I'm like, what? And he's like, well, I mean, like, he's like, but you're going to stay here. And he's like, you're going to pay me rent and everything's going to be fine. And because you could just tell, like he knew, he knew that like, he didn't know how to say whatever he's going to say. And he just said it, and he knew that I was going to freak out, and I didn't really freak out. And I'm like, okay, man, like, all right. It was scary. He's like, yeah, man, like he's like, you're not my assistant anymore. He's like, you're just going to work here, and you're going to have this room, and I'm going to have that room, and you're going to pay me this, and I'm not paying you anything anymore. And I'm like, okay. And that was 25 or 20 years ago or whatever, 21 years ago or something. And I'm still doing okay. So he was right.
Blessing in disguise.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. I think he thought that I was going to feel betrayed or something or like whatever. And I was just, it was cool how he did it, on only a way he can do it. But that, long story long, I mean, I learned so much from him, and he is fucking brilliant, like one of the most brilliant musicians ever. And he's a true artist. He makes my ADD look like the valedictorian of freaking Harvard, dude. Like, his brain is so different than everyone's, and he's so fucking talented. He's one of the most gifted musicians I've ever been around in my entire career. And anybody will tell you that. I mean, his work style's not for everybody. I mean, anybody will tell you that. He'll tell you that. But I learned so much from him about arranging songs, vocal production, getting good takes out of people. He also was the one that was like, you need to forget this theory bullshit, because I would be doing things like diatonically on something or other, and I'd be like, that's not the, I'd say that's not the right note, or that doesn't. He's like, I don't care. He's like, does it sound right? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, then it's right. And he has enough rock and roll in him and enough theory in him to just be a dangerous dude musically. He's amazing. And I learned so much about that stuff from him that, yeah, it's kind of invaluable. And yeah, I mean, I would hope we learn a little bit from each other, I guess. I don't know. I was there really because he felt I was valuable to him in terms of guitar sounds and miking things up properly. He taught me a lot about Pro Tools workflow. I mean, I was already working in Pro Tools at that point, but he learned from Jim Morris, and I learned from Suecof, and anybody who works at Morris Sound, along with Suecof and I have pretty similar workflows. We all use the same trackball. We switch our editing tools the same way. It's just very similar, like we really copped Jim and Tom's working style, because that's where Jason learned and that's where I learned. That was it. I mean, we continued to work together. He would still hire me to do things, but it was not a salary or a guaranteed situation. We worked on a lot of records, especially up through 2010. Maybe I would come in and get guitar sounds for him, or do some editing, or if a drummer was really bad and he was just like kind of, his brain was just hurting from it, he would essentially hire me to be like, make this guy work, make these drum tracks work for me. And it's not that he couldn't do it. It's just, he wanted to stay fresh for the songs. And yeah, there's just a lot there. Yeah. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, it's definitely like it's so important to learn that entire workflow from beginning to end. And so having someone that can walk you through that definitely, obviously he learned it from other people and you learned it from him. So it's cool to just see that consistency between all the people working there. So definitely cool. And I really liked what you said about like when he said that you were following theory too much. And I think it's a good reminder too that like sometimes when you know the rules, it doesn't always mean that it's the right thing,
Yeah.
and so it really does come down to that simple question of like, is this sounding good? And if it is, then it is, a great takeaway to take from that. Very cool, man. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask about was you're very well known for your guitar tones, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, and it makes sense. You're a guitar player, so you've and like you said, you've been hyper attentive to your tones and all that stuff, and trying to get those right. So I want to dig into that a little bit, and I imagine that over the years you've probably done a lot of experimenting to figure out like what goes into getting great tone. And I'm curious to know, like in your quest for achieving great tones, like what sort of experiments have you tried, and what do you think? Looking back at it now, like what would you say has made the biggest impact, or does make the biggest impact in guitar tones?
Speakers probably the biggest one, man. I mean, of course, I'll tell you, it's all in the hands and things like that. It is, but I mean, a good speaker and a good cabinet is pretty essential. But it's all important, I'm not a corner cutting guy. I have what I need to get the shit that I need done, and there'll be parts of my house falling apart because I bought the preamp that I needed or paid a drum tech an extra $800 to be here for 2 days, So I'm not going to be the guy that's going to be like, don't fucking worry about that. It doesn't matter. It all fucking matters, dude. And I'm so tired of guys being like, oh, guitar tone wood is a myth, and this doesn't matter and tubes don't matter. It's like, dude, fuck, they don't, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. Like, it all fucking matters. But the biggest thing is probably speakers and, a good performance. But, obviously the amp has to sound right, but that comes down to finding the right amp for the player and the hands and the riffs and the tuning and the string gauge. It's all synergistic, man. Like the JCM 800 back there. I've had that amp for 20 years, and some amps it's the fucking all-star, and or some albums it's the all-star, and some albums it just falls flat on its face. And a lot of that has to do with the amount of low end going into the amp, the string gauge of the player, how hard the player hits, the guitar, all of it, man. Like it's just. But if I'm going to say one thing, the speaker, because it's like guitar sounds are in metal this giant blanket of white noise over the entire album. I mean, it's like a curtain. It's like a sheer curtain that might hang over a window that you can see through. And the speaker is kind of the shade or the transparency of the curtain, and I mean, it's going to affect everything. How your overheads sound against the guitars, how your vocals sound against the guitars, all of it. It's like the guitar sound determines everything as far as a metal or rock record goes when you're talking about high gain guitars. It's just massive, like you're talking about the entire frequency response of the album, But yeah, that's it. I mean, it's mostly speakers. I'm a speaker freak and fanatic, an amp fanatic, and pickups matter and wood matters. Whether people say it does or doesn't, it matters greatly. So yeah, it all matters.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that? There's that YouTube video. I can't remember the guy's name. I think it's like Jim Little or something. And he does those like, where does guitar tone come from? And he like does all those somewhat scientific experiments, I guess.
It's incredibly unscientific. I've reached out to Jim Little. I know exactly who he is. He lives here in Nashville. I emailed him and offered to give him my studio for 3 days to come and do experiments. And no response. Maybe he didn't see it. Maybe he knows that I will challenge him. But his tone wood experiment was so highly flawed that I don't even know where to begin. I mean, people are like, "Oh, he hooked up a thing to a 2x4 and it sounded exactly the same as the Strat, and the cheap Strat sounded the same as the expensive Strat, and this and that." And he did the same thing with microphones and this and that. Oh, microphones don't matter, and the beer can microphone sounded amazing, and this and that. It's fucking bullshit. He's wrong. Like, there's no two ways about it. Like, he's doing a major disservice to people in terms of research on their own. But I suppose people like me and you will always exist. We're always going to want to know the answer for ourselves. But somebody like Jim, I think he's a good-natured guy, but to set a microphone in front of a 6x9 speaker and run the same thing through it and say that everything sounds the same, I guess I don't really know what to say, man. Like, especially with a vocal, you suppose you have a really loud rock vocalist and all those inflections, when they get real loud and they get real soft and they back up off the mic and back, to the mic and things like that. I suppose it's kind of impossible to really scientifically test how those things are gonna be on two different mics. But you got to realize that you have the voltages and the dynamics and everything is different, through all those mics. And when you have these static tests like he's doing, it's not real world. And that's, it's the same thing with guitar players, like the 2x4 test. Oh, it sounds exactly the same. It's like, well, number one, he didn't do any high gain. Number two, there's no hand, right hand or left hand, whatever you are. There's no picking hand on the guitar. So you don't have a palm muting test. You don't have, he's effectively removed all sub-frequencies from the test by getting rid of palm muting. Not removed it, but you have so much sub-frequencies that come with palm muting because of how accentuated the low end gets. He wasn't giving us resonant notes. Everything was open ringing notes. There wasn't real resonance. There's just so many variables that weren't there. And yeah, I understand that he took the variables out, but you have to have some degree of it there to understand what about the human interaction with an instrument or a microphone makes it sound the way it does, because he's effectively removed all that.
When people are looking for tone, they're looking for something that reacts based on their playing. And if you're just giving it the same stuff all the time, that's just unrealistic.
Yeah, it's totally unrealistic, and I mean it's very frustrating to have people so sure because of that video. And it's like I could easily show how and why tone wood matters, but I need to have time like Jim Little. I mean, I've spoken to fucking Sweetwater. I mean, I've had the marketing guys at Sweetwater say, we will literally give you the materials you need to make this video happen. But it's about me finding the time. I'm still going to have to source different bodies and different things like that. I'm going to have to take the time to swap electronics and hardware from body to body, play these riffs, whatever. And I'm going to have to take the time to show that the human body is consistent enough that you're not hearing differences in takes.
For sure. I think he said his first video took him like a year or more to make. So yeah, you can only imagine when you're then trying to prove it at a bigger scale.
I mean, I got to make a living, you know what I mean? And I make a living, splitting these hairs and listening to the alder guitar versus the mahogany guitar with the same fucking pickup in it and the same whatever on it, and people just don't understand that there is people like me and that do this. And this is not an ego thing at all, but there's probably a handful of guys on earth that have spent the amount of time I've spent listening to high gain guitars in a room good enough for mastering and how it reacts against the drums, how a pickup change makes a kick drum sound different, how people just don't even remotely understand how much all this stuff adds up. And you may want to justify that it doesn't, so you don't have to spend the money. I'm talking about people that say it doesn't matter. But it fucking matters, dude. And people pay us to make those decisions. If it didn't matter, then we wouldn't exist. And maybe that's me being preservation or whatever. It's madness to me that people think that these things don't matter. And, I'm happy to prove them wrong. I just got to find the time,
For sure. Yeah. Well, I've read that you're the kind of guy that isn't afraid to spend days working on getting your guitar tones right and, making sure that it's being tracked on the way in really well. And I'm curious to know, like, when that happens, like, how do you manage to keep your objectivity when you're spending so long trying to dial in your tone?
I don't sometimes. I mean, I've taken it way too far many times, to the contrary of my argument of that does it matter or not. So yeah, I've gone way too far, and then you have to step away, and you need to. The only thing that's going to give you objectivity is a starting point, and being able to kind of touch that grass or touch that starting point, and say I liked this a week ago. Do I still like it now? Usually that type of thing will ground me. I may say, oh, this is so much fucking better than last week. Or I'll be like, man, I just spent 5 days on this guitar sound and the first one was still the best one. It happens, dude. It used to be harder to admit, and now I'm like, no, the first one was the better one, and I need to not have a fucking ego about it or not trip on it or anything. And bands appreciate that especially. And it's also part of just making sure you're not trying to force something to be something that it's not. And that's a big part of recording, and it made my life got a lot fucking easier once I stopped trying to make things into something they weren't, if that makes sense, Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Well, you mentioned like speakers being the thing that you think make the biggest difference. And, I think there's so much emphasis on like the guitar or the amp, and speakers are obviously up there as well, but I feel like guitars and amps are the things that people tend to talk about the most. When it comes to looking for the right speaker, what kind of stuff should people know about that if they're starting to dig into learning more about tones and understanding what one speaker might sound like versus another, that kind of thing?
When it comes to high gain, I mean, just fucking buy Celestion, man. This is not even an ad, like, they're not paying me to say this, but just get a Vintage 30 and start there. And it's, oh, I don't want to sound like everybody else. You're not going to sound like everybody else, man, because every speaker sounds fucking different. But
everything we just talked about, all the feel and everything that goes into it too.
Yeah. And you got to understand that, like, you do need to have a good starting point, But yeah, get a Vintage 30 or a 75 or a Creamback or something, and just. I mean, dude, I'm 20 years in, and as much as I want to make other companies work, and look, I mean, I want to try Christian Cola's new Eminence. Like, I have faith that it'll be good. But like, if I'm going to tell somebody to go pick up something and I know is going to work, I'm going to say go buy a Vintage 30 and have it in a 412 cabinet, preferably not an oversized. And it's not that I don't like oversized, but it's just like, get you a regular size Marshall or EVH cabinet or a Mesa cabinet, get the right fucking speakers in it, put a 57 on it, and you're not going to go wrong. And it's not about sounding like everybody else. It's like, I mean, does Van Halen 1 sound like the Black Album? No, it doesn't. But they're both Marshalls with 57s on them. Does Van Halen 1 sound like the new Judas Priest record? No. But they're both Marshalls with 57s. They're vastly different guitar sounds, but it's a baseline to start with that works and is good, and then you can start experimenting and things like that. I'm not even sure if you asked me how to get a good guitar sound or how we got on this exact thing, but yeah, that's just what I would tell people. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's good to have your go-to things to go to first, and then see if it's doing the job for you or not, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a lot more worth it than trying to make another plugin sound great. By all means, like, I haven't sold plugins. I mean, I'm all about making your life easy in that sense. But if you really want to make a living in recording and want to do things that make people want to come back to you, then I think that learning how to mic shit up and understanding how it works is the biggest thing you can do.
For sure. Well, I mean, we just talked about how you're not afraid to spend time to dial in the sounds and experiment, but I also know that you do a lot of reamping as well. And so I'm curious to dig into that and to know more about like how you make that decision of when you want to reamp something versus just taking that time up front and doing it that way.
Well, I mean, as far as the production standpoint, like if a band is only here, say, for 3 weeks or something, we can only my guitar player can only be here for 3 weeks or something, you know. The band will tell me. Yeah. Okay, well then we're just gonna get a scratch guitar sound, or maybe even use a plugin with a DI, and get something we dig that's in the vicinity of what they like. Track the guitars like that, and then once they leave, then I'll reamp. That would be the workflow on a production of mine. Whereas if we have all the time in the world, then I'm going to sit there with them and we're going to listen to my cabinets and their cabinets and my amps and their amps, and you know, usually try to go with their stuff first, you know, and then if they want to hear my stuff, we'll plug it up. And we'll do that if we have the time. And then if it's a mix and they like their guitar sound and they want it, like nowadays, I ain't fucking reamping that shit, dude. It's all I'm going to do is open a can of worms for myself and make more work for myself. And, you know, because 9 times out of 10, if they already like that guitar sound, they're still going to like it when I mix it. Whereas if I get a mix and they're like, we're not really feeling the guitar sound, or hey man, do your thing, and I pull it up and it's real whistly, or maybe it doesn't have enough low end, or sounds anemic, or maybe just isn't sitting in the mix right, then I'll be like, yeah, I'm gonna try this, and then we'll probably do a mix with my guitar sound and maybe a quick one with their guitar sound, and show them both, and maybe not tell them which one is which. I've done that many times, and whichever one they pick is the one we go with, you know.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's, you know, it's usually just, if I feel like the record can be vastly improved, then I will do it. But, you know, almost no matter how it goes, I'm always going to spend a couple days on a guitar sound. So once I make that commitment to reamp, I'm like, well, fuck, here we go. Like my budget isn't going to get any bigger, and I'm going to lose I'm going to spend significantly more time on this now that I'm going to reamp. So it's one of those things where it's like, do I want to do this? Is it worth it? Whereas I think a lot of guys now are reamping because they just can't fucking mix other guitar sounds, or they don't know how to, or they're on a time crunch. And for me, it's about what's the best for the record. You know, I think a lot of mixers now are just, you know, they claim they're not getting paid enough, or they don't have the time, or they're just flat out scared to use other people's tones, and they just aren't listening. It's just a real problem. I mean, you know, you look at somebody like Andy Wallace, or, you know, even my buddy Jay Rustin, or I'm trying to think of who else really doing it nowadays. I mean, guys like that, they mix what you give them. You know, like I remember a couple records ago, Andy Wallace mixed a Gojira record, and the overheads, you know, had a pretty bad whistle to them. And you know, most of those guys, especially like the Swedes and the Danish guys right now, like with the exception of like Tu Madsen, who like really lets it go. Tu will mix what you give them. A lot of these Swedish guys now, and some of these British guys, and they just flatten everything out, and everything becomes so pleasing. And it's like, that's not, you know, I understand that it's part of being a mixer to kind of wrap this up in a bow that everybody can digest, you know, in a package everybody can digest. But there's a fine line of just it becoming toothless, and you're not really representing what's there anymore. You know, like you listen to Chaos AD by Andy Wallace, and then you listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit, you know, and it's like, they're so drastically different sounding albums, and it's the same mixer. And he just kind of gets out of the way. He balances everything, you know, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do. Is like, yeah, are we going to do a lot of the same? Like our decision making causes us to use a lot of the same tools over and over. Like I understand that, but like my Cold Chamber record sounds nothing like the Cannibal Corpse record I did the same year. You know, whereas a lot of guys, it's like, am I listening to the same band? You know, like things sound so the same, and I just don't understand. It doesn't seem like art at that point. You kind of seem like you're just kind of ditch digging, I guess, and I don't really understand that relationship with with audio. Like, I'm like, what does this sound like? Does my shit sound like on their music? It's like, what does their music sound like with me on it? You know, like, does that make sense? Like, it's like,
yeah, it makes sense. I feel like all my favorite records, like my favorite producers, they're always the ones that, yeah, you're right. Like every record sounds different. And maybe it is like to do with like people just using the same tools and getting into their workflow. But I also think that there's like a comfort level that people fall into. It's like a trap where they know certain plugin chains work, or, you know, like amp sounds or whatever. They go to their go-to things because they've made it work once before, and either they're too lazy to change it, or they think that they're known for that sound, so they have to keep replicating it for the sake of making people happy to preserve that sound or whatever. But I think that, like, you're absolutely right. Like, my favorite records are always the ones that have that uniqueness to it, and what makes that band special. So
yeah, I mean, and look, I'm not helping things by selling plugins and drum samples and things like that, but also it's like, you know, that stuff is there to help keep people inspired, you know, and to make songwriting easy. You know, the tune track stuff that I did, I mean, I consider that a really pro thing. Like, you can get down to the nitty gritty with those raw drum samples, and you can do something that sounds nothing like what you know, like what I gave you, and those things are very moldable, you know, because you can get down into the, you know, just individual mics and all that stuff. That's what it's there for. But in terms of like something like the STL stuff, it's like, yeah, it's pretty obvious, you know, that's my guitar sound when you use it on a record. Usually, you know, it's kind of just got my cabs and my speakers, which are, like I said, so critical. Like, you know, and I can kind of pick those things out. I can hear when people use my stuff, and I'm flattered, yeah, but does the band have amps? Does the band have cabinets? You know, and sometimes they may not, so I understand. But, you know, when I see a lot of engineers bitching about, oh man, you know, I can't get good drum sounds because none of the drummers come in with good drum heads and blah, blah, blah. It's like, motherfucker, we didn't either at Audiohammer. You know, like, it's, you know, like when I was working with Jason, it's like we were making records for a couple grand. I mean, we're talking like this is local studio money, and we were still spending the money on new drum heads, and I was tuning the drums at that point. We were making our own drum samples, and, you know, people just, it's like, man, you know, you're stuck in this world because you're not spending the money or the time to get to the next phase. Yeah, dude, that hardcore band may have like one decent song, and it sounds like shit because the guy came in with a fucking marching drum head and paper towels on his fucking toms and all that shit. It's like, dude, go get some fucking Remos, spend the money, and it's like maybe you get a single with these kids. This sounds fucking banging, and now you're fucking booked for months because you spent an extra $600. And it's like, you got to spend money to make money, and people just won't do it, and it's always an excuse. And, you know, it sucks. It sucks that people think that that's what recording is, that, you know, it's decided by the limitations, you know, of yourself. But it's like, you know, I really think that most people with the right ears, if you're going to spend the time and the money, you're gonna do something good, and you're going to have people want to come to you for that if you're a tolerable person to be around, you know?
I feel like it's just one of those things now where, like, people have learned about, like, oh, people use samples in their recordings, or people edit, and so now there's this like expectation that, like, oh, people are just going to do that anyway, so I don't need to put in the effort to get it right. And yeah, it's like even people that haven't really entered the studio already know about things like auto-tune and all that stuff. So there's this almost like weird expectation that, like, you can cheat your way through the studio experience and not necessarily focus on getting great sounds, right? And
yeah. I mean, it's that's the biggest thing I say to people when they ask me, you know, like, what can I do to, you know, get a career going in audio? Do some songs for free, man, and, you know, eat shit, spend the money to make it sound right, get the tones right, you know, learn how to tune drums, learn how to, you know, set up guitars, and do the work, man. Yeah, it sucks. I mean, you might only be making $20 an hour, or you might be doing a song for free. But I mean, it's one of those things where I see a lot of guys who expect to just like have a fucking Apollo and 12 drum mics and say, I'm a producer now and be open for business. And then they're like, oh, I'm not booked. And it's like, well, dude, like, did you take the time, like, behind you to put something on the wall to make the room sound okay? Do you know where the best spot in the room is for your drums to sound right? Did you get good drum heads for the drums? Did you know? I'm sorry that the guitar player and the bass player showed up without new strings. Like, you know, put them on, dude. You know, and make a couple songs that sound right and invest in yourself. Because if you're serious about making a living, you know, maybe the band won't be thankful that you made them sound insane and you spent the extra $800 on materials and techs and things like that to get it to sound like it does. But now you have 3 other bands that came to you because of how that sounds. And that's $4 or $5 grand worth of work. Or 6, you know, 20 grand or whatever it is, you know? It's like, come on, man. Like I just can't let shit go out the door if number one, if the band isn't happy, and number two, if it's not like me throwing my all at it. But, you know, there's times when it may not be that at all, you know? Like say I'm working with 6 Feet Under and Barnes is like, yo, this mix is cool, but I like the demo better. You know, there would have been a time where I would have said, fuck you, man. We got to put out this polished mix and I'm off, you know. But if he wants it to sound like shit and he wants it to sound gross and cool and whatever, that's his prerogative. And I made him happy, you know. So you got to find that fine line between making the artist happy and knowing that you left it all, you know, kind of, you know, you didn't leave anything on the table and you didn't leave any stone unturned in terms of your effort. You know, that's what will make you sleep better at night and bring you more work, in my opinion.
Fair, man. I think that's a great point. Like you got to put in that work, and that is the thing that's gonna, people will see that. Like there are so many basement producers and engineers these days, and it's like the ones that stand out are the ones that are actually taking the time to care about it. And so yeah, I think anyone listening to this, if you're trying to get off the ground as an engineer, it's like put in that work. And like you said, like bring people into the studio, spend the time, get it done right, and just let your portfolio build based off of great work as opposed to just like churning shit through the door. So
yeah, exactly. And also listen to your artists. I mean, some of them might be boneheads. You may not agree with them. And some of them may really push you to do insanely great things. Like there's guys throughout my career that have really pushed me, and I specifically will work with them. They may come to me and say, hey man, I don't have the budget I had last time. I'm like, I don't care, dude. We made an amazing sounding record. You make me do good things. Let's fucking do this. And you can't steamroll people. I can tell you that a lot of the headaches in my work life ended when I stopped dictating to bands how their shit should sound and just started being the vehicle for their vision. You know what I mean? Of course they come to you and they want you to they do want me to dictate certain things. Of course, I'm being paid to make a decision. But when I stopped trying to make things into things that they were not and just mixing what was there, my mix notes became almost non-existent. You know, it's like, what do you guys want to sound like? Oh, what guitar sounds do you like? What amps do you like? Oh, you brought your amp? Well, let's mic it up. You know, they'll be like, oh, I love it, or oh, I hate it. And then I listen to one of my cats like, yeah, that's what I'm looking for right there. Then there's no surprises. You know, hey, how do you like your snare tuned? You know, because they don't get surprised, you know, when you send them back a mix with a snare that sounds like Def Leppard when they tracked it with a pitch that sounds like, you know, fucking Dave Grohl or something, you know, like it's like you have to really be mindful of that stuff. Cause there was times when I'm like, oh, this sample's good, I'm going to put it on here. And then I didn't even take into account that I'm totally changing the pitch of the drum. That didn't last long because the pushback was major. And I see and hear about mixers doing this stuff and giving bands pushback about it. It's like, dude, who are you? Like, you're there to make decisions and you're there to make their vision sound good. If they want you to fucking have a fart sound as a snare, then you have a fart sound as a fucking snare. Like, you know what I mean? Like and it's funny because I can almost look back into because I started out making records and just doing what was right, and had a very finite set of tools. And when I say doing what was right, I mean like doing what was mixing and recording what was there. And then there was like a period where, like I got Sound Replacer and Drumagog and these other plugins and these tape emulators and things like that. And I can hear that point in my career when I was not listening to bands. And a lot of times they still loved it, which was great. But I look back and cringe, And then I look back at my early stuff. I'm like, man, I was just really kind of getting out of the way there and turning up the fader and being like, just knowing that I was capturing things the best they could be. And then I got sidetracked with options and tools and things I didn't need. I remember kind of just coming out of that and waking up and being like, what am I doing here? Why am I overdoing this? Everything's overcooked and overthought. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's one of those things when you're learning about this stuff, like you learn about a new tool and then that becomes like a thing you think you need to do all the time. And then it just becomes this like ever-growing list of tools and processes that you need to do. And then you reach that point like you're talking about where you're just like, why the fuck am I doing this? And like, is this even necessary? Like, is this 0.2% difference that I'm spending hours and hours on editing, like, does it make a difference? And I think it's a good reminder that we just got to focus on what really matters there.
Oh, yeah.
And so with that said, I'm curious to know then, like, these days with a lot of metal music, it's often very tight and like very edited sounding in a lot of ways, compared to maybe what we were used to hearing in like the early, like the 80s and 90s. How much of the work that you do these days are you like, how much editing are you doing on a lot of these tracks? And
as little as possible now, as little as the band will let me get away with. I really push things a lot harder. Like on the new Entheos record I'll really push Chaney, and Naveen too. We'll really push Chaney to be as in tune as possible. We're not looking to tune everything. And if we do tune something, it's got to be extremely transparent. It's got to be close enough to where it doesn't sound edited. And, like Naveen's drums, I mean, that's not edited at all. Or like the new Warbringer record I did last year, like that's really about as tight as that band really is, and there's not a lot of crazy editing. And that's what's really making bands stand apart now, because if I'm going to grid something for you, then what are you paying me for? Because the computer's making the decision, not me. And it's really about, I guess, getting things to a point where it's the best human version of that. Because if, like I said, if we start editing, then I'm putting myself on the same pedestal as the guys in the bedroom, because they're not making decisions, the computer's making decisions. And you guys are paying me for my ear, I'll say to the band, and there's never really pushback on that, I mean, if I'm working with somebody like when I did Rings of Saturn, like I didn't even really comprehend how tight they wanted it, at first. And then it's like, oh, well, it's just part of who they are. And then you work with Cannibal Corpse and, you say to Paul, hey, that hi-hat part, and he'll go, no, I know. He's like, I know I'm playing triplets over eighth notes, but he's like, that's just what I sound like. He knows what he's doing. You can't fix Paul's thing. It's like fixing Lars, like it is though. I mean, it's so important to the sound of the band. It's just kind of doing a disservice to almost everybody to fix them and make them sound like everybody else. They can do that. And if they want me to, I'll do it. Sure. But it's always about how real can we keep it. And I mean, if I'm being really honest, if the drummer's spectacular, like a Naveen Copperweiss or somebody like that, or a Carlos Cruz or a Kevin Talley or something like that, or a Pete Weber from Havoc, or Sean Reinert, I'll do all that editing. I'll go over that, and it'll usually be pretty minimal. If it's somebody that's really struggling, it's maybe a new drummer or somebody that just doesn't have good feel, then I may hand that off. I may hand that off at that point, because I know that I can say, hey man, I'll hand that off to somebody who's working for me, another engineer, and say, hey dude, can you edit this for me? And hey, turn the grid on 80% and exclude it within 20. Because at that point, we're going to do the same job. You know, if we're relying on the grid, but we are keeping some mistakes in there, we're pretty much going to come up with the same result. Whereas like if I'm the one that's editing Naveen or whoever, and they have this fantastic feel, you know, or Alan from Dahlia, we'll go through that stuff together when we finish the song. And I'm there with the drummer. Hey, let's slide that. Don't slide that. Leave that there. I rush that fill going into the chorus, and it makes the whole thing pop. Whereas if I had handed that off to an engineer and said, "Can you just grid this for me?" it would have been gone. And it makes a big fucking difference, man. You know, like people don't listen. They don't want to take the time to listen, and you know, it's crazy to me that they don't want to do that.
Fair.
You know?
Yeah. So then with all of that said, the last question I always like to ask everyone is, in your mind, what makes a great sounding mix?
A great sounding mix. Balance, accentuating the arrangement. You know, I'm trying to think of how I can say it without sounding too sophisticated or cryptic. You know, because I hear a lot of producers will say things like, "Oh, it's just got to feel right, man." You know, but yeah, it does. I mean, it gets to a point where it feels done. But the balance is huge, and a lot of that balance has to do with things being recorded right or fitting together right. There should be a perfect suspension of disbelief when it comes to sonics. You know, like when I hear "And Justice for All," do I realize there's no bass? Yeah, I do, but like I'm transported somewhere. You know, or like, for instance, like "South of Heaven" sounds insanely great to me. And same with "Rain and Blood," great sounding records. It's just kind of like out of the way. But then I hear "Hell Awaits," you know, if we're talking like just to kind of use Slayer as a reference. The songs are just as good to me, but like the reverb levels and the snare level, just like it distracts me. And I mean, that's a matter of taste, but it's, you know, like, whereas the things about "Rain and Blood" and "South of Heaven," I'm not distracted by the mix. I'm just transported to a place where the music is moving me, you know, and I think that's harder to trick a mixer like myself or you into really, you know, into that suspension of disbelief, I guess. But for the average person, I think that's what makes a good mix, and they don't even know it. They're not distracted by things, you know?
Fair. Yeah, I think that there are going to be people that want that like CGI'd mix, you know, and everything's just like really extreme. But that's definitely a creative decision, and usually I think that's something that the artist is also shooting for as well. So it's not necessarily taking away the humanness of the artist, because that's what they wanted to begin with, right?
Right. Yeah. I think it's just, you know, getting out of the way and, you know, just letting it be what it is. You know, there's so many guys that are brilliant at that, you know, luckily. So
yeah, absolutely, man. Dude, this has been awesome. I really love learning more about your views on all this stuff, and I think there's a lot of really critical things that people should go back to this interview and listen to, because there's so many things that people are going to learn a ton from and help with their tones and getting their portfolios built up well. So just first off, just thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate that. If people want to learn more about you or maybe even work with you, like, what's the best way for them to do that?
I mean, I have my website. It hasn't been updated in years, but if you need to get a hold of me, you can do it there. You know, Instagram, I'll check that. But my website, you can email me directly usually. And yeah, I mean, it's not hard to get a hold of me if you want to figure it out. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I have some things coming down the pipe this year that I'm not going to say yet, but they're pretty cool and excited and to share them with the world. And yeah, I mean, they're not just records. They're, you know, actual tangible things that may be useful to other people in the recording world. So
very cool, man. Well, we'll definitely pay attention for that. Dude, again, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. So that was my interview with Mark Lewis, and I really appreciated that conversation. I thought there was a lot there that just really resonated with me, especially that idea of like putting in the work, you know, and Mark talked about it in a lot of different ways, but, you know, even things as far as like getting your career off the ground and putting in the work in the form of doing maybe free gigs or doing low price gigs or putting in more effort than you think a project deserves sometimes. Sometimes we, in our minds, we have, number one, we'll value our own time. We value our ego and our opinions. And, often those kind of things can get in our way of maybe doing what's ultimately the right move, right? Sometimes if something feels uncomfortable, maybe that's actually the right thing to do. And so maybe that means that you have to spend a little bit of extra time to get an album sounding great. Maybe you lose a little bit of money on that project, but in the end, you end up with a project that sounds way better and makes your portfolio look way better. And that can end up being the thing that bands find sounds awesome, and then they start to come into your studio because of it, So there's often things that I think people kind of shortcut themselves with, and it's very easy to shoot yourself in the foot if you're just going to cut corners. So yeah, I just thought that what Mark said there just really was important, and it serves as a good reminder that sometimes you just have to put extra time and effort into things, and because of that, you're going to get better results. And Mark talked a lot about it as far as getting guitar tones and stuff like that. For some people, spending 3 days on a guitar tone might be insane. But then again, Mark's very successful. So maybe that's working for him, maybe that's part of the reason for it, right? So I think it just, again, it comes down to being willing to put in the effort, building up your clientele. And then once you have that, then you're going to have this new standard that you shoot for. And part of the byproduct of taking a lot of time initially is that the more you experiment with things and the more you learn the source of where a great tone comes from, or what difference it's going to make if you put a mic this way versus that way. You're just basically building this mental Rolodex of strategies and techniques that are going to make it so that next time you don't need to actually spend that much time, but you're still going to have the same level of quality that you need to have. So yeah, I just think it's a really good lesson that even if things feel frustrating in the early stages, that something's taking a really long time, look at it as a major learning lesson. And there's going to be so much that you're going to benefit from just taking that time. So stick with it. You're going to get better results out of it. And just realize that this is a thing that takes time to develop and takes time to learn, And sure, there are ways to kind of shortcut the process a little bit, like hiring a coach. Where with a coach, you're going to learn how to get the sounds that you ultimately want faster. And you can also learn more about the theory of what's going to happen when you do this versus that, right? Now, that I will say, that doesn't replace experience. The more you experience, the faster and better you're going to be. But going into something informed can go a really long way, as opposed to just trying to figure it all out yourself, right? So if you're interested in learning more about how to improve as an engineer, learning more about how to get the sounds that you want to hear, or how to make the right decisions based on what you hear in your head, that's exactly what I work on with my students inside of my coaching program, Amplitude. In that program, we're figuring out, what do you want your music to sound like? What are you struggling with in your processes? Where are the inadequacies in your process, or the things that are holding you up and making you go slower? And based on that, we're optimizing everything in the recording, editing, and mixing stages to make sure that you're making the right decisions, you're getting stuff done fast, and it's getting done at a high quality. Taking that effort, taking that time to learn this stuff is going to go a real long way. So if you're interested in learning more about this, make sure to check out MasterYourMix.com/amplitude, and you can find all the details of the program there. And on that page, there's a link where you can book a call with me. I'd love to hop on a call to learn more about you and your music, what you're working on, what's worked for you in the past, what hasn't worked for you, and to ultimately see where I can best help you. And if I can help you, then I'd love to invite you into the program and tell you all about it. If not, no worries. I only work with people who I truly believe I can help. So once again, MasterYourMix.com/amplitude. You can find all the details of the program there. And with that said, we've reached the end of this episode. So thank you so much for sticking around, and I can't wait to chat with you in the next one. We'll talk soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Master Your Mix podcast. Please make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app and leave a review. If you have any questions or comments for the podcast, send an email to questions@masteryourmix.com. And for more information on how to create pro recordings from your home studio, visit masteryourmix.com.